pentagram dedicated to Henry Foreman. In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth, man mastered the mammoth and horse, and man was the lord.
Good afternoon, good evening, however, whomever I may find you, and wherever I may find you, wherever you are listening to my dulcet tones from. Well, welcome to episode 170 something of Agitators Anonymous. Today I'm going to be discussing, mainly the new Primordial album, how it ends, and the artwork has come out, the title, the first video, Victory as a Thousand Fathers. So I'm just going to actually discuss for the first time, I suppose, some of the concepts behind the title, the album, that kind of thing, along with a few other bits and pieces dealing with criticism, dealing with trolls, dealing with forum dwellers who wish to cast aspersions on my character, and how one may deal with those things, along with other random gossip. You can go over to my YouTube channel. I'm going to be posting a couple of cool videos up there, including Instagram question and answer session, that kind of thing. Is going to finally get my ass moving and do some more of the Call from the Grave series. There's going to be a Black Sabbath Odyssey with Adi from Solstafir incoming, a few other stuff with Joe from Gamma Bomb. So go over there and have a look. You can just search my name. You'll find my YouTube channel. The show, as ever, is sponsored by Metal Blade Records, who are releasing the new Primordial album. And by the way, you can find the link to the pre-order of the bundle of the vinyl underneath the descriptions here. I do not know how many colours there is or how many copies there are. I kind of clocked out of paying attention to sales and that kind of thing and numbers, which is weird because I'm sort of obsessed with numbers in a sort of mildly autistic way, if I can use that word. I've always been very, very obsessed with numbers and dates and remembering things. But for some reason, over the last couple of years, I sort of clocked out of the math behind Primordial. Or the maths. The math, right? You say the math. And so, how many copies there are on vinyl of the new Primordial, I don't know. I do know that there's an unusual thing sometimes these days, which is certain mail orders have their own pressing. I think there was, maybe you have one, I don't know, of the last Primordial album, Exile, a Nuclear Blast pressing, which has the Nuclear Blast imprint on it, which seems like a very odd concept to me, but why not? There was even an offer to do an Irish pressing, and it sort of appealed to my inner record collector, because somewhere or other in the vinyls that are flanked to my right, there are Rory Gallagher Irish pressings, Thin Lizzy Irish pressings of some 12 inches, even some AC/DC Irish pressings. And way back in the early 90s, I think there was even an Irish distributor for all of the death metal albums of Rotor. I'm not sure if they pressed their own copies, but certainly in the late 70s, early 80s, there was Irish pressings of certain records, and a part of me liked the idea of an Irish pressing of the new album. But would they all be sold in Ireland? It's very difficult to say, and then people want to order them from abroad, and the Irish postal charges are exorbitant, my friends. Exorbitant to the point of making a business dealing with the post almost pointless. And seeing as they break about 2 or 3 out of every 10, well, you know what I mean anyway. But you can use the promo code ALAN2023, because that's so far the year we're in. Anna Vulgaris, or whatever you want to say, Era Vulgaris even, which is an unusual Queens of the Stone Age album, isn't it? It's got Make It With You on it, and then a lot of the other songs, not sure. Sounds like some bad drugs are involved in that record. Although their new record actually is really, really good. But yeah, you can use the promo code AA2023 and you can get 10% off your order. And so if you're going to order that new Primordial bundle, well, that's where you can get 10% off it. Good idea, right? Indeed. This month's band are The Crawling from Northern Ireland. It's doom death metal. It's sort of atmospheric, emotional, engaging kind of stuff. Really good guys as well, and they deserve your support. And you can go to their Bandcamp and find all sorts of actually really fucking cool stuff to check out. And they are no doubt going to be playing some gigs soon enough, but you'll probably hear them underneath what I'm talking about now. And that's The Crawling. If you think this sounds like a good idea for your own band, to have the kind of little demo promo for you, well, get in touch. Also, if you need a backdrop, slide into my DMs, as I have a contact who also sponsors the show, and we have many happy customers who've had some really, really great deals on huge and small backdrops and all sorts of stuff. All right. So some gossip, and then let's discuss the new Primordial album for a little bit. My dear Prigozhin, Oof, you don't cross that Putin fella, do you? Indeed. Maybe some of you have been following this fuss that happened at Midgardsblot Festival with the Native American band Blackbraid. I think there was accusations of racism because the guys were thrown out and all this kind of stuff. Was sort of following it online, and I thought it was very interesting that Midgardsblot Festival, which is in Norway, which Primordial have played, by the way, and I have to say is one of the most holistic, peaceful, calm festivals that I've ever been at. It has a very, if I may say so, feminine energy to it. Almost every crew member we met were all women and stuff, and there was loads of... it was just a very, very peaceful, calm atmosphere there. And when I heard that there was, that this band Blackbraid were ejected because the whole festival was racist and this, that and the other, I thought that sounds a little bit strange. So I did a bit of digging, and true enough, it seems like one of the guys got wasted and fell asleep where he shouldn't have fallen asleep. And if you know anything about Norway and Sweden especially, you can't sleep in a bar. You can't just chill out and just be wasted. In fact, you can't even really be drunk in a bar in Sweden or Norway. You will be thrown out, and bars and events can lose their licenses if people are wasted. In Ireland, it's like, yeah, whatever. I mean, people sleeping all the time you see at festivals on the grass or whatever who've been wasted drinking all day. In Finland, I mean, at 4 a.m, you go around the bar and there seems to be people sleeping on benches everywhere. But anyway, you can't do that in Norway, you can't do that in Sweden because there are licensing laws, and you could get into trouble because the cops are often, rolling around seeing what's going on, seeing as if you're keeping a tight ship. So this guy then, security wanted to move him, and he seemingly spat in the face of security. Now, I don't know about you, but if you spit in the face of the security in Dublin, oof. If they're far enough outside the jurisdiction and don't think there's a camera watching, you will get your head taken off by the security. But having watched the video, this guy was super calm and just was like, you have to leave. You're not allowed to spit at the security. And this band rushed to call the festival racist and this kind of stuff, and then slowly walked back every message. You could sort of see we're getting a bit more sober now. This is maybe not such a good idea. But I thought it was very interesting that Midgardsblot just literally didn't comment and let all of the people who were there and witnessed it just comment for them. It seems pretty vulgar situation, really. I don't really know why I'm commenting on it. In fact, maybe I shouldn't, but it just happened to be what I was just reading. Now, I'll give the guys in the band the benefit of the doubt, of course, because people say they're good dudes and anybody can get wasted and make a mistake and fuck up. But if you get wasted and spit at someone, well, you know what I mean. I think all bets are kind of off about then making allusions to other things in the aftermath. But I've certainly done enough dumb, stupid things when I was drunk. So, let's give the guys a pass in this regard. Although whether the heavy metal red top press are going to report both sides of the story remains to be seen. Who knows? Reminds me of being Irish and watching Irish people argue at the door of a bar going, are you kicking me out because I'm Irish? And it's like, nah, man, it's because you're being a drunken dickhead. Anyway, a little bit of heavy metal gossip there for you. I think the message of the story is maybe wait till you sober up. Anyway, what are we talking about? Yeah, we're talking about the new Primordial album, How It Ends. What am I going to talk about? What am I going to say about it? Well, first things first, How It Ends. It's not the end of the band. I cryptically called it that because, in a way, I sort of wanted to start the conversation about that, to consider about how long the band has been going, how many years are indeed left. Are we going to be doing this when we're 57, 58 in another 10 years? I don't know. It's very hard to say whether we will be allowed to do it the same way. Part of me wonders. I was talking to Sakis from Rotting Christ last weekend at Frantic Festival in Italy, and we were talking about the idea, like I said to him, mate, do you think that you're going to be allowed to take so many flights in one summer back and forth to festivals in the upcoming... if the climate emergency sort of fear and propaganda begins to totally take hold in society. Again, you have to qualify every time you talk about that by saying, yes, of course, there is a conversation to be had. Again, there's so many of these things that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about dealing with criticism. But the idea that there is always, that everything is just a binary choice between good and evil is just so intellectually redundant. The truth is always, or the discussion, there has to be a round table of discussion that is in the center of all of these things. And you have to be able to say, Yes, of course there is a climate discussion, and on the other side you have to go, okay, and who's lobbied this voice, and who's paying for this? How is it manipulated? Will our civil rights and civil liberties be infringed upon? Is the conversation going to really be resolved in Western Europe, or is it in the developing world, or in China, whatever? There's a very complicated discussion, but people got so annoyed at me when I made a vague comment about Greta Thunberg, which was that I feel sorry for the kid. She's only a kid, but being sent in to do an adult's job, because the optics of an adult politician giving out to a kid, the people who lobby her, I think, know very well that that's not an optic that anybody wants to resolve. Anyway, what am I fucking talking about? Oh yeah, how many years are left in the band? Well, I mean, who knows? It usually takes us 3 or 4 years to make an album. So, I mean, could there be another one? Will there be another one? Certainly the band were not impressed with my title. But in reality, the title, How It Ends, is really about, as you can see on the cover, this is a 1920s propaganda poster that was in the Irish Farmers Journal. That originally had a sheath of wheat. It's quite difficult to say, actually. A sheath of wheat in the farmer's hand, but I replaced it and put a gun in his hand. And the idea is this: how it always ends at the end of a gun. Is this the end of every... I suppose we could say it like this. If To the Nameless Dead is about the establishment of states, of borders, about the movement of the geography, the cartography, the ancient cartography. You know, if you look at a map and you go, or you read about history, and you know, say from the Burgundians, just came into my mind as an ancient peoples who then disappeared, got absolved into the state. You know, or you could go to Italy and go to the various city-states, that kind of stuff, the Genoese or whatever. And what happens to their language, their songs, the variation and themes, the different vibrancies of the different peoples. If To the Nameless Dead was kind of about the movement of borders and nations, this album, How It Ends, is really about the resistance to those things. I suppose in a way it champions the first concept, or the first the primogenitor, whatever you want to say. Oh no, that's not the right word, isn't it? Is it the prime mover of the album is the concept of liberty, and the fact that liberty is the most important word in the English language, or at least the most important meaning of the word. Now, my friend argued with me, no, it's love. And I said, well, what if you love something terrible? What if you love something, what if you love murder? What if you love war? What if you love very, very dark things? You can use your own imagination to imagine what those things might be. You can still love them, I mean, in the actual meaning and essence of the word. Liberty defines itself, and I think it's the pursuit of all peoples in the world, the pursuit of their own liberty, and so therefore I started with that as the theme for the album, and it's not a lockdown album, it's not a reaction to those kind of things. I didn't want to be a say what you see sort of thrash metal lyric album, because I find that it's a bit too simplistic, with all due respect. But then again, if I was in a thrash metal band, maybe it would be perfect for that. But the point being that the concept of liberty, I went back and I looked at, say we have this very famous nationalist romantic poet called Joseph Plunkett in Ireland, and there's a few lines in one of his songs, and if you know a famous Irish song called Grace, you should look that up. It's a pretty beautiful song, but he married his childhood sweetheart the night before he was shot. He was shot by the English in the aftermath of the Rising in Ireland about 100 odd years ago, the 1916 Rising. And his story is he's a very romantic character in Irish history. Of course, there's no day to commemorate him, or any of the others, as I understand it. But I was sort of examining his life, and I was looking, and there is a romantic lens to some of this, but the idea that young people like this would give their lives for a revolutionary cause. And I began to examine the idea of resistance movements, the resistance to empire, the resistance to colony, the movement of poor peoples, like this song Pilgrimage to the World's End, which is the next video, which is kind of a bit about poor refugees moving, and the echoes of all throughout the hundreds of years where Irish people were taken as slaves, or sent as criminals to the colonies, to Australia, that kind of thing. And the echoes of today as people are moving across waters poor people moving across waters trying to seek a better life from themselves. So you could suppose you could say it's a sort of it's not a pro refugee song, so to say, but it's about an understanding of the movement of poverty, misery, and how those people are called one thing or other by the authorities that have sent them hence and where. And the whole album, I sort of kind of has the loose feeling of liberty about it, how we relate to liberty, the pursuit of liberty, people who give their lives for this sort of righteous cause. And it's sort of, the album is full of questions, which are, who are the people right now who would stand up against what I see as the encroaching claw of authoritarianism, which has been stretching itself across the world in the West for the last 5 or 10 years, but especially the last 5 years in the West, which is this sort of idea that we're inviting unelected systems of technocratic governance institutions, unelected systems of whether it be platforms, internet platforms or providers, or unelected bodies of health and governance, that we really have no say in, who have been sort of encroaching on our personal liberties and personal freedoms, and asking who are the people today who are standing up and, the outlaws, the rebels, where their one song mentions Ned Kelly, for example. Now, it's not to compare back then and now, but it's about the echoes of rebellion throughout history. And certainly heavy metal has always had those themes, but yet I've found in the last couple of years the amount of people who are actually willing to identify themselves as actual rebels are few and far between sometimes. And so it made me think, who are these romantic heroes that we will perceive in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years time, who stood up to the encroachment of authoritarianism? Because there's certainly no doubt we have lurched towards authoritarianism, where people see things like freedom of speech as a sort of dirty word. There are so many things now which 10, 20, 30 years ago were concerns of the left that now seem to be concerns of the right, things to be turned on their head, and many people on the left asking for censorship, asking for cancellation, who see freedom of speech as a dog whistle. A dog whistle. These kind of nonsense sort of words that somehow now have crept into our everyday lexicon, and they're mainly used to just shut people down and stop conversation. I'm going to get to that as well, how you deal with trolls, how you deal with people complaining. So that's the general sort of feeling of the album. It's kind of an album of resistance. There's a lot of anger to it, which you're going to hear. There's a lot of sorrow, sadness. There's some very heavy, weighty, tragic songs, I think, which are kind of more dedicated towards, as I said, the movement of poor peoples throughout the world, resisting empire, resisting colony. I was really kind of like only in my mind debating whether to make this podcast about the Haitian Revolution and the stories of Black Spartacus and all this kind of stuff. These amazing stories, the first ever real independence gained by a small country in the face of empire. It's an absolutely amazing story. I think I'm going to do that next week, the Haitian Revolution. Really, really inspiring stuff. And in my head, these are the kind of things that sort of went into some parts of making of this album, which might seem unusual to people, but definitely they're about the resistance to empire, the resistance to colony, and also, I suppose, during lockdown, doing a lot of travelling around Ireland, which maybe I'd never quite done before the same way, and really getting a much better sense of the country and its emotional relationship with always being this sort of poor underdog, and poverty and resistance, and language, and the songs that resisted in the face of empirical tyranny. All this kind of stuff really kind of went into the album, and there's an awful lot of anger in the kind of the record, so that's kind of where the idea of the how it ends, like, is this how it ends? So it's asking questions, so in the third single, which is the title track, which you're going to hear at some stage, and one of the lines, I think, sort of asks, is this how it felt when they asked you to stand in line for the very last time? That kind of thing. So it's kind of cryptic, and it's sort of leaning into this cryptic notion that this is the end of the band, but also maybe this is the end of other things. And that's, that's the sort of thing you're able to play with lyrically, even if they're, just metaphors or whatever. The album's writing tone only really took 3 or 4 or 5 months. It was very, very quick. I suppose at this stage I should say, and I probably should have said this from the outset, which is that Micheál O'Flynn, as you would say it in the Irish pronunciation, Mick more or less left the band. We haven't made any statement about it because we weren't really doing anything. There wasn't really any gigs or anything. He didn't write any songs for the new album, didn't play on the new album. It may come as a surprise to some of you because Mick has become obviously a very, very beloved character, if we can say that, to everybody who knows the band. There's a lot of fans of Mick out there. And I think what happens is that sometimes you just become burnt out. There's been plenty of times where I felt like, oh no, not another fucking airport after 2 hours sleep. And sometimes you just want the quiet life. You become a bit burnt out with the endless pinging in the WhatsApp group, or like today I open my emails and there's this file doesn't work, there's that file, we need to film you for this thing, this thing has to happen, and it can just break your brain, and you're doing so much stuff. And this is not to say that Mick was doing the same kind of things as me, but that was his choice. Now, whether he returns to play music, whether it's with us or somebody else in the next coming years, who knows? Who knows? Who can tell? But for the moment, we are just 4. This may mean that at some stage over the next couple of years, though, that some of you may have noticed that Kieran every now and again isn't able to play a gig. And this is, like I said, we aren't a professional band. Primordial's not a professional band. So therefore, sometimes, family and whether you have enough days off work left takes precedence over being able to do everything. So it might come a moment where you look at Primordial and you go, who the fuck are these 3 baldy cunts who are up on stage with Paul? You know that Shawnee played with us if you saw us on the last tour with Swallow the Sun, and Jerry has been helping us out for 20 odd years. So there won't be a reshuffle of members, but there might be some different optics next year. But it's all kind of under the broad church of Primordial, so you just have to kind of accept that if and when it happens. Is the opening single Victory as a Thousand Fathers representative of the album? In a way, I would say no, not really. There was discussions in the album about where the song would be on the track listing, and in the end, it's going to close out the album. It's no real secret that the traditional elements are less my thing and more the others. That's more their thing. I respect, of course, the trad stuff. But this song is the only real, I suppose, trad song, which has singing over it. There's an instrumental called Tradishunta, tradition in Irish, which I think is a version of a song called the Ballamore Fancy by the Bothy Band. You should check out the Bothy Band if you don't know the Bothy Band. That's my old Irish traditional recommendation. But it's not really representative. My friend Jarvis from Night Demon commented that it sounds like black metal Thin Lizzy. Maybe he's not wrong. It's got a sort of blackened sort of Irish traditional rock vibe going through it. It's not really representative of the album. I don't think any of the other songs have that overt traditional influence. But, Primordial's always had that. You'd go back to the songs like Sons of the Morrigan, go back to other songs like this, and you will hear this 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. You will hear these kind of riffs, little impromptu, little jig and a reel there. Like I said, not exactly my thing, but it balances out because then the song comes thundering in with a kind of quite a apocalyptic dark feel. Now, all of the costumes we're wearing, they're explained at the start of the video. If you haven't gone and looked at the video of Victory of a Thousand Fathers at this, go and take a look because we put a lot of goddamn effort into it. And you sort of make a video, and I talked about this in the podcast a few weeks ago, and you hope it begins to get a bit more traction. But what you realize sadly about videos is people want to see something often incongruous or something really mundane or everyday. It's weird the things that people share become viral. If you put a lot of effort into something like that, sometimes it just kind of, like the Exile Amongst the Ruins video, it kind of falls on deaf eyes? No, I mean heavy metal ears. Oh, well, you know what I mean. And what can happen is that you put an awful lot of effort in and it doesn't get that many responses. But, you know, if you watch the Lebanon Hanover video, Gallows Dance, I remember watching that when it had like 10,000 views. Now, I don't know, it has 10 million or something. But what it is Goths buying bread in their local shop. I mean, and so you get all these old Goths and people like the Kieran Smiths going, oh, have you seen this new band? Blah, blah, look at this. And they share it with their other mate who's a Goth years ago. And it's kind of the incongruity, is that the right word, of the situation. You play something which shouldn't exist in another mundane situation. This seems to be the kind of key to getting views for a video. My cousin Gareth often said to me, listen, if we are in your apartment late at night and you put on all the black metal stuff and I film you just walking through the crowds of people as they're coming out of nightclubs with all your stuff on and people reacting to you, this would get views, because people would view it and go, fucking hell, have you seen this guy dressed up like this walking around with nightclub people, and people going fuck off in your face and maybe throwing beers at you or jeering you or being, you know, somehow maybe cool with you. Although if you've heard stories about the streets of Dublin lately, there's less cool things happening than I probably would get a bit more abuse. But that's another podcast. You can read about that on my daily Streets of Dublin Irish Crime podcast. But and he was right, because I mean you can't always predict these things, but sometimes people want to see mundanity. They want to see odd things in difficult, strange situations and circumstances, for whatever that's worth. However, there is a video coming out which is a very, very detailed explanation of all of our clothes, which I think people might find quite fascinating. But the rest of the album, there's quite a bit of black metal, quite a lot of epic kind of metal stuff. I think people maybe who were a bit put out by Exile Amongst the Ruins sort of dark tone, which was quite a bit less epic heavy metal than once before, might be a bit more pleased with this particular album. The expectations, it's hard to say, because it feels like you probably feel this in your own work, in your own job, in your own industry, that there's a sort of atomization happening, in that there's a sort of lack of the human touch, so to speak. That's a Phil Collins song, isn't it? Human touch, or whatever. Poor old Phil is in a bad way now. Have you seen him? Did he rupture something in his spine drumming or something, and now is in a wheelchair? Anyway, poor old Phil. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the expectations. It feels like, compared to 10 or 15 years ago, when there was a sort of, I suppose, naivety in the air, or there was a sort of, you guess you were a bit younger. You were a bit younger. You were getting out there playing on your first tours and all kind of stuff. There seems to be a certain level of atomized world weariness. Now, I think part of this is because of lockdown. I think the pandemic is a kind of punctuation mark at the end of a certain era of society, or a certain era of social society, because people got used to working from home. And so there's certainly something feels missing from the expectations of the album, even though it's the album number 10, it's quite important. And you release it at the end of a summer where you haven't played much, and you're sort of looking to a year away to see will those expectations be resolved. And like I said before in the podcast, releasing an album during lockdown, forget it. I talked to my friend Addy from Sulphur about it, and he was like, fuck man, feels like we wasted an album. If I can put words in your mouth, Mr. Tryggvason. Oh, I just butchered his surname, even worse. I had it with Dread Sovereign. The last Dread Sovereign, which I think is a great record, and I'm really super proud of it, but we weren't able to go out and play, we weren't able to do anything with it. It just came out, we just looked at numbers online and went, oh, look, some people like it. Oh, the numbers went down. Oh, okay, now everybody goes, oh, you do another one? It's like, fucking hell, I have to start writing another whole load of songs. Anyway, the point being that expectations are still of how the album's received, or what you're going to play, are still a bit up in the air. Of course, we have this tour coming up with Paradise Lost. Maybe it's called Ultima Ratio. I'll put the links underneath where you can buy tickets from it, if I can find them in amongst the crazy mess of my inbox. That isn't a euphemism. But also, it's interesting to note, well, I don't really pay any attention. I say this and people don't believe me, but I actually don't. I don't really read reviews. I don't read people gossiping about the band. But there are some funny things that happen, you know. I have some friends who act as my, like, sort of sentinels, you know, my sort of, you know, they're like, what do you call those dogs that they bring in to smell out corpses in the ground, that kind of thing. But certainly the podcast has sort of raised the level, some other little weird spectre around the band, in that there's quite a lot of people who maybe 5 years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, around the time where Greater Men Have Fallen, there's a certain element of goodwill towards your personality and your character. There seems to be a kind of percentage of people, most people who listen to the podcast support the ideas that the podcast is about freedom of speech and the concepts of liberty and that kind of thing. But there's a certain amount of people who just assume, because, say, for example, you were against lockdown, I was against the principle of lockdown, still am, still think it was a heinous crime against civil liberties, and I think it was a Pandora's box that has been opened that will return to haunt us. And I think that all of the misgivings that many of us had about, lockdown and vaccinations, a lot of them have been vindicated, because the things you were told turned out not to be true. And now, in the fullness of time, many people come to me and go, yeah, maybe so. Well, don't forget, at the time you were jumping up and down, shouting at anyone who raised their hand with a question. But that's not really the point. The point is that this seems to have certainly tarnished some people's opinion of the band. Do we need to agree with the artists that we like about their politics? I certainly don't think so. And I certainly think that if you look back through the history of the artists that you do like, without placing myself on the same kind of scale, of course, it's the micro to the macro, you don't need to agree with their politics. You certainly don't. Do you know what Ian Curtis's politics were? I don't know. You probably find that there's some things you maybe disagree with. But certainly a new Primordial songs seem to sort of inflame certain people on certain forums, giving out about me, calling me right-wing this, calling me that, calling me the other. I'm so sure there's a forum somewhere else, which is a right-wing forum, where people are calling me the other, calling me on the left or whatever. As I said before, politically homeless. You occupy the grey area. I don't subscribe to these binary choices. One of the most hilarious kind of things is somebody sent me a screen grab of some forum, and it said, all you need to know is that Alan did an interview with Bardo Mythology. Bardo Mythology, the online magazine, with the implication being that makes you right-wing. And this other voice goes, oh, okay, so does that mean that Lisa Gerrard from Dead Can Dance is right-wing? ? Because she also was in Bardo Mythology. And then what I would imagine is a confused pause inside the brain of moron number one goes, well, I guess so, obviously. And then a list of other people who were in the magazine, Sakis and Rotting Christ and this and that, well, obviously. And it's just quite, this is one of the most things that I find the most incredible about this whole argument from left and right, is the idea that you, simply by speaking to someone that they disagree with you, this makes them the thing that they consider that they oppose. It's such an intellectual cul-de-sac. It's such a dummy's argument. It makes such little intellectual sense. The idea that there is no resolution, there's no conclusion, there's no debate. You're not supposed to ever speak to somebody that you theoretically are opposed to, or that you have opposing points of view, that this sort of adjacent argument is just one of the most nonsensical, intellectually deficient arguments you can have. That you are this because you spoke to a person that I think is the other, even though I have no evidence of that, or maybe it was 10, 20, 30 years ago that a person had these views, or maybe they just have those views and you should speak to them. The idea that we don't gain anything, we don't progress anything intellectually, emotionally, culturally, historically, whatever you want to say, from speaking to the people from the other side. I mean, this is how almost every conflict is finally broached. I mean, are we saying that people from let's take Northern Ireland, that people from either side of the political divide in Northern Ireland should never have spoken to each other? I mean, get the fuck out of here. It's just such a nonsense. It's such a reductivist argument. And I, like I said, don't go on forums. I don't read reviews. I don't really care, to be honest. But every now and again, my good friend who shall not be named, sends them to me to kind of poke me. And it certainly seems that a new album sort of brings out the trolls, people willing to criticize your press release, or criticize your every word, or criticize, they're doing this in uniforms because of this, that, the other. regardless of what the opening sentence says, they're quite willing to disagree with you. But the world is full of trolls. But the idea that you are never supposed to speak to anyone from the opposite side. Look, at 19 years old, my grandfather, who was English, volunteered to go and fight the Nazis, but he was an arch-conservative, fundamentally. Worked that one out. But what he did do was go and actually do something huge with his life, while you just sat on Twitter complaining about other people. Anyway, what am I talking about? It's been an all over the place ramble. The album's getting close. Am I excited? Not really, not yet. But there is something special, even still, after all these years, in my natural inclination towards cynicism and pessimism, of holding that vinyl in your hand going, look at this, look what we fucking made. And somehow it feels to me like the scene kind of needs an album like this at the moment. I don't know if that sounds arrogant or not, but a defiant, angry, epic heavy metal record that's asking some questions. That's, that it's got some very simple meanings, but also is kind of standing up for the little guy. It's about the outlaws, the outsiders, the rebels. It's about the people who knowingly are standing up to authoritarianism, but know their life is going to be cut short and young. And the privilege we have of looking back over their lives and judging them now while we sit in the indulged confines of the, I suppose, the poisonous fog of certain elements of Western society. But that is it, how it ends. Well, my friends, episode 170 something of Agitators Anonymous is just a random brain ramble. You can hear I've had too much caffeine. I do hope you enjoyed the interview with Psy, with Mirai from Psy last week. It's still there. I go and watch it. Mirai is just brilliant. He's just such a great character, and the new album is fucking great. And so, my friends, until next week, go and check out my YouTube channel, because there's going to be some videos coming up there with which I can give the old algorithm a bit of a kick in the bum. And we shall speak to you next week. Over and out, Planet Satan.